New statistics released this week by the Bureau of Crime Statistics and Research show an alarming increase in domestic violence-related assaults across Australia, up 50% in some parts of Sydney. On top of this, 1 woman a week is murdered by a current or former partner, and 1 in 4 women have been abused. On the eve of International Women's Day, we're joined by domestic violence campaigner Rebecca Poulson to discuss what can be done to address the scourge of domestic violence in this country. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me here.
And happy International Women's Day.
Yeah, you too.
For tomorrow. You are a great advocate for women survivors of domestic violence. You stepped up to this role after tragedy in your own family. Can you tell us what happened that fateful day?
Yeah, so on the day of my 33rd birthday, my father and my niece, Marley, who was 4, and my nephew, Bass, who was 1, were all murdered. And they were murdered by my brother-in-law, Nung. My father was murdered as he was the one looking after them at the time, and he tried to save his beloved grandchildren.
It just must feel like yesterday to you in so many ways, but it's been 16 or so years since that tragedy. Yeah. Has the landscape of domestic violence changed at all in that time?
It can be sometimes a depressing area to work in. We have had some moves forward, but a lot of the things that I am saying today, still in my advocacy work, is what I was saying on the stand of my family's court case 16 years ago. So it feels like I'm repeating that we need these same things to happen. But we have actually made changes in terms of the numbers, sadly, have stayed the same. So we're still seeing 1 woman murdered per week, as you said. But on the other hand, we're seeing things like the police culture is, they're working very hard to try to change the culture towards domestics, as they used to call it. We're also seeing the media, the way the media report now is much more insightful. And, we have to be honest that probably, 20 or 30 years ago, I wouldn't be here talking to you about a domestic. Media did not necessarily report on domestics. So we've brought it out from behind closed doors, and we're talking about it now. It's in the conversation, and it's being made, the journalists, etc., making sure that they're reporting on it in a better way. And we've seen journalists have been pulled up when they use language that is blaming the victims. We've seen in the really sad case with Hannah and her children in Brisbane recently, the initial detective that came out and said perhaps this is a man that was pushed too far. 30 years ago, I don't think there would have been any lead on or consequence of that, but the fact that he was stood down for making that remark and saying that there may have been an excuse for this behaviour, when we know there's no reason ever for a man to kill his children and his wife. So there is things that are slowly changing, and I have to remind myself of that when I see yet, another woman has been killed, or yet another child has been killed.
These stats we saw out of New South Wales this week, and up 50% in some parts of Sydney. Yeah. Do you put that down to more reporting, which would be a good thing, or do you think that there are more cases of domestic violence?
I think that the cases have remained very consistent over the years. It was something that happened behind closed doors. Police did not attend domestics in the old days. Media did not report on domestics in the old days, and the community as a whole did not interfere into what happened between a husband and a wife. So sadly, I think the statistics have, the numbers of women and children that this is happening to in the homes have stayed very like the same numbers. But I think because perhaps we're having this conversation, perhaps, people are seeing these stories repeated in the media in a respectful way. They're seeing that they might be looked after if they do step forward now, that they might be helped by police.
They've got more courage to do that.
They've got more courage and confidence to come forward.
So we know that we know now that DV is not just physical. It's taking a while to catch on, but the emotional abuse, the financial abuse, the coercive control can be far more damaging. And not only that, it often leads to physical abuse, and physical abuse does not live in a vacuum. It starts there. So what can we do about this coercive control? That seems to be where we need to address
it. Does, yeah. A lot of countries are already leading the way, like in this, and they're criminalising what we call is coercive control. And coercive control is when there's a pattern of intimidation or domination, and the outcome is stripping another person of their sense of self-worth and of who they are. And so that pattern can be emotional, it can be sexual, it can be financial, it can be spiritual, it can be stopping, you know, a person attending their place of worship, it can be controlling the finances. Finance, in this pattern, usually always finance is a part of it, because at its most basic, I usually say, is that how can you leave when you have no money? If you don't have $1, it's very hard to walk out the door, particularly if you have care of children as well. So financial abuse is a component of it, but it's usually always with another component. So it's just any pattern of intimidation and control, and that's what can be very hard to collect evidence on for police, because police need evidence to be able to charge. Which is why a lot of people now are campaigning that coercive control should be a crime, because often these things that start off little, these things where you're controlling, you know, how much food someone can have, where you have to report on every dollar that you're spending on your children's food. Or, for example, with Hannah's case, you know, she was saying she was coerced into having sex with her partner every night, because if she didn't, he said he would make, you know, hell for the children the next day.
And you mentioned that your sister, she wasn't physically abused.
No, and that's why I always try to talk about how important coercive control is, because quite often it is the majority of abuse that's happening, and it doesn't go away, it doesn't stop, and quite often it can escalate. And in a lot of the cases we see where the eventual final physical act of domestic violence is murders, which is the worst case scenario, there has been such a long pattern of coercive control before that, and red flags. And the dangerous thing is a lot of people don't realise that that is abuse. They don't, because they have in their mind, you know, of the man standing over the woman with the black eye and she's cowering. And that's what, you know, we understand domestic abuse is. But actually it's a long-term pattern of abuse and intimidation. And sadly, in Hannah's case, and it was also in my sister's case, her partner had never hit her and he'd never hit the children. So we never actually understood what she was living in was violence. So we need those systems, the people who are educated in that systems like police and legal, to actually tell, you know, like
to take that seriously.
Yeah, to take that seriously, and to let sometimes the victim know. Like 68% of victims don't know they are victims because of this pattern. They might just think, I don't have a black eye, I'm not a victim, I'm educated, you know, I'm well off, or whatever it is. Well, so yeah, we really need to, because with Hannah's case and with my sister's case, there was that pattern, but it's nothing that you could like, you know, fixate on and say this is what is going to eventually happen. So,
well, thanks to your wonderful work, you're shining a light on that.
Thank you.
Doing your bit to criminalise coercive control, which does need to happen. There's that wonderful hashtag too we should mention, hashtag maybe he doesn't hit you. And that's also helping to change that culture. So thank you so much for coming in tonight.
Thank you.